For 1 year, I believed every midnight departure built my path to management. Instead, my annual review yielded a cold smile, deferred promises, and more weekend work. That night, I did not cry or quit. I quietly opened my laptop, piecing together the paper trail my supervisor thought was buried forever. 6 weeks later, the woman who turned me into an office ghost would corner me, pleading, "Give me just 5 minutes," to save her crumbling career. My name is Chloe Thomas. I am 31 years old, and for the past 12 months, I have been functioning as the Operations Program Lead at Auraline Transit Systems, a mid-sized logistics and transportation hub stationed in the humid, concrete heart of Charlotte, North Carolina. I use the word functioning because living would be an entirely inaccurate description of what I endured during that time. For an entire year, I willingly fed myself into a relentless, soul-crushing grinder of 75-hour work weeks. I sacrificed my sleep, my social life, my physical health, and my sanity, all anchored to a single, glittering promise dangled expertly just out of my reach. After this growth phase, Chloe, we will get you that management title you deserve. I believed it. I swallowed the corporate bait whole and asked for seconds. I stayed late when the building heating was shut off. I came in early before the sun even considered rising, and I made the massive, tangled gears of Auraline turn smoothly while the people above me slept in their comfortable suburban beds. I managed the dispatch software integrations. I smoothed over union disputes with the night shift, and I covered the glaring operational blind spots my superiors pretended did not exist. But the grand illusion of corporate meritocracy shattered permanently on a gray Thursday afternoon, inside a soundproof glass conference room on the executive floor. The air conditioning in the room was always set a few degrees too low, deliberately designed to keep people uncomfortable and alert. But today it just made my skin feel brittle and thin. Across the polished mahogany table sat Dana Mercer, my direct supervisor and the director of operations. Dana was a masterclass in modern corporate camouflage. She wore impeccably tailored neutral blazers, kept her voice at a soothing, measured cadence that sounded like a meditation tape, and always had a sympathetic, understanding tilt to her head. She projected the image of a mentor who deeply cared about her subordinates. Today, however, she could not quite bring herself to look me in the eye. Her gaze remained fixed on the frosted glass wall just behind my left shoulder, tracking some invisible point in the distance. She folded her hands neatly over her expensive digital tablet. "Chloe, you are incredibly valuable to this team," Dana began, her voice dripping with that manufactured warmth I had spent a full year trusting blindly. "You are very good at execution. Your attention to detail on the transit logs is absolutely flawless. But regarding the promotion to operations manager, the consensus is that you are just not quite ready to lead. We need to see more high-level strategic thinking." The words landed in the center of my chest with the dull, heavy thud of a dirt clod hitting a wooden coffin. Not quite ready to lead. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic mesh chair, feeling the blood drain completely from my face and pool in my feet. My mind raced at a frantic pace, trying to find a gap in her logic, a place to insert a defense of my relentless labor. But Dana was using the exact same tone that had kept me docile and dedicated all year. It was gentle. It was frustratingly reasonable. It was so perfectly, expertly ambiguous that fighting back would only make me look defensive, emotional, and unstable. It was a trap made of soft words. She slid a single, crisp sheet of paper across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. It was my annual performance review. My eyes desperately scanned the cleanly printed text, skipping the generic corporate filler until they hit the final, standardized rating box at the bottom of the page. A neat little black checkmark sat firmly and unapologetically next to a devastating phrase, "meets expectations." Meets expectations. The phrase felt like a physical, violent strike to my face. It was an insult meticulously wrapped in bureaucratic neutrality. It erased every single night I had stayed at the office past 9 o'clock, staring at glowing spreadsheets until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. It completely invalidated every weekend swallowed whole by sudden system migrations, server crashes, and last-minute vendor disputes that I had to mediate from my kitchen table. It spat on all the Sunday family dinners I had missed, the times I had texted my mother, sorry, tied up at an emergency work thing, from a bathroom stall while crying from sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. Meeting expectations meant I was perfectly average. It meant the blood, sweat, and absolute devotion I had poured into the foundation of Orlean was considered the bare minimum required to keep my badge active. Before I could even process the profound indignity of the printed document, Dana smoothly transitioned to the next item on her agenda. She did not allow silence to settle in the room. She knew that silence breeds realization, and realization breeds rebellion. Since we are aiming to bridge that leadership gap over the next cycle, Dana said, offering a tight, encouraging smile that did not reach her eyes, I have an urgent task that will really showcase your dedication and strategic value to the board. We need the operational portfolio completely overhauled and finalized for the investor meeting on Monday morning. I know it is short notice to drop this on you on a Thursday, but I really need you to drive this initiative over the weekend. I know I can count on you. Chloe. Another weekend. Another 2 full days of my rapidly evaporating youth extracted to polish the armor of people who had just coldly told me I was not good enough to stand beside them. I opened my mouth, perhaps to say no, perhaps to demand an explanation of how doing more grunt work proved leadership, but my eyes caught something resting casually on the corner of Dana's immaculate desk. It was a freshly printed, spiral-bound presentation deck, the exact same strategic rollout deck I had stayed awake intensely editing and formatting until 2 a.m. just a few nights prior. I knew every margin of that document. I knew every complex data graph, every agonizingly phrased bullet point detailing our quarter-over-quarter efficiency gains. I had built the entire thing from scratch while my apartment was dark, silent, and cold. But right there, staring back at me in bold, elegant typography on the pristine white cover page, was only one name prepared by Dana Mercer. My name was nowhere to be found, not even a tiny footnote at the back, not a small acknowledgement of the person who actually pulled the data. In that fraction of a second, a cold, sharp clarity sliced through the suffocating fog of my chronic exhaustion. The hurt, the feeling of betrayal, and the desperate need for validation vanished, instantly replaced by a hyper-aware, chilling detachment. I was not a valued team member to Dana. I was a ghostwriter for her unearned ambition. I was the silent engine she kept safely hidden in the dark under the hood, revving it mercilessly past its red line limits so she could take credit for the incredible speed of the car. I stood up slowly. I did not throw the review paper back in her face. I did not raise my voice or demand my name be put on that stolen presentation. I simply nodded once, gathering my notebook and pen with slow, deliberate, mechanical movements. As I reached for the heavy silver handle of the glass door, Dana offered her final piece of weaponized, toxic empathy. "Do not think of this as a failure, Chloe," she said, her tone dripping with a benevolent condescension that made my stomach turn. "Look at it as an opportunity to prove yourself further. I believe in you." I did not look back at her. I pushed through the heavy door and walked down the long, heavily carpeted hallway, the sound of my own footsteps muffled by the thick corporate fabric. I returned to my desk, sitting down slowly as if I were navigating a suddenly unfamiliar, heavy gravity. The open plan office stretched out around me, a vast sea of gray fabric partitions, cheap swivel chairs, and glowing dual monitors. Dozens of people were hunched over their keyboards, noise-canceling headsets clamped tightly over their ears, their tired faces illuminated by the pale, sickly blue light of their screens. They all looked just as exhausted as I felt. We were a massive collective of high-achieving, terrified professionals, silently grinding ourselves into fine dust, completely terrified that if we stopped moving for even a second, we would be instantly discarded and replaced. Nobody dared to speak the ugly truth out loud. Nobody dared to admit that the golden carrot dangling in front of us was made of cheap plastic. In that precise moment, sitting under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of Auraline transit systems, the final, pathetic illusion broke into a million pieces. I understood everything with terrifying, crystal-clear precision. This was no longer about working hard to get ahead in a fair world. This was not a meritocracy where extraordinary effort translated to elevation and financial security. I was trapped inside a predatory, parasitic system, carefully and purposefully designed to feed on the self-worth, the anxiety, and the desperate loyalty of hardworking people. Dana did not hold me back because I lacked the mystical quality of leadership skills. She held me back because I was far too valuable, far too efficient, and far too cheap as her invisible workhorse. If I became a manager, she would have to actually do her own work, and she had long forgotten how to do that. I placed my hands flat against the cool, faux wood surface of my desk. I took a deep, silent breath, feeling the air fill my lungs differently than it had just an hour ago. The pathetic desperation was gone. The desperate, clawing need for Dana's approval was completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I was not going to give them my weekend. I was not going to give them my youth, my energy, or my soul anymore. But I was also not going to just walk away quietly into the night and let her keep the comfortable kingdom I had built with my own hands. I reached out and opened my laptop, the screen flaring to life and reflecting in my eyes, and I began to formulate a very different, much colder kind of strategy. Looking back at the meticulously color-coded calendar of the past 12 months, the most insidious realization was that I had not been a naive, helpless victim stumbling blindly into a trap. I was a highly capable, fiercely intelligent professional who had been carefully, systematically, and deliberately eroded. The erosion did not happen overnight in a dramatic confrontation. It was a slow, steady drip of calculated promises, designed to wear down my boundaries until nothing but pure output remained. Dana had a favorite corporate buzzword that she deployed like a precision weapon stretch assignments. She framed them as exclusive golden tickets, whispered to me as if she were letting me in on a massive corporate secret. I am giving you this stretch assignment, Chloe, so the executive board can see your raw, unfiltered potential, she would say, placing yet another impossibly thick, completely disorganized project folder on my desk late on a Friday afternoon. What a stretch assignment actually meant in the sterile, profit-driven vocabulary of Auraline transit systems was pure, unadulterated management work. It was high-level strategic labor stripped entirely of the management title, completely devoid of the necessary operational authority, and, most importantly, completely lacking the matching financial compensation. I was handed the heavy plow, but forbidden from ever touching the harvest. Whenever the core dispatch routing systems completely crashed on a Saturday night, it was my personal cell phone that violently vibrated on my bedside table, shattering my rare moments of rest. I was the one who frantically logged into the remote servers at 3 a.m, my eyes burning from the harsh blue light of the monitor, hastily patching catastrophic data migration failures so the early morning transport fleet could roll out without an embarrassing $1 million delay. I was the one who stood in the freezing, echoing transit bays during the miserable winter months, absorbing the red-faced, profanity-laced screaming of furious regional clients whose critical shipments were stalled. I stood there, nodding, swallowing my pride, and offering immediate, concrete solutions while they vented their rage. I was the mud-covered infantry fighting in the trenches. Dana, conversely, was the pristine, untouched general who only emerged from her climate-controlled tent when the battle was already definitively won. She materialized exclusively for the high-level steering committee meetings. She would stand before the executive vice presidents in her immaculate tailored suits, gracefully clicking through the presentation slides I had frantically finalized just hours prior. She would use words like, "we navigated," and "our strategic pivot," and "my team's resilience," effectively absorbing all the light in the room while I remained hidden safely in the dark. I should have recognized the blood on the tracks much earlier. I was not the first person to hold the operations program lead title under Dana Mercer's regime. There were 2 others before me in the short span of 3 years. Both had vanished in total, deafening silence. The first one, a brilliant data analyst who could build predictive models in his sleep, quietly packed up his desk one unremarkable Tuesday, handed in his security badge, and moved entirely out of the state of North Carolina without saying goodbye. The second, a fierce woman who had spent 10 grueling years building her operational reputation, abruptly abandoned the logistics industry altogether to open a small bakery in the suburbs. At the time, the Open Plan office collectively shrugged off their sudden departures with an apathetic kind of survival instinct. It is a high-pressure environment, people murmured around the water cooler, avoiding eye contact. Sometimes it is just not a good fit. You either have the grit for logistics or you do not. Nobody dared to examine the common denominator sitting comfortably in the corner office. We were all far too busy trying to survive our own crushing workloads to notice the silent graveyard of burned-out high achievers Dana had left in her wake. The theft of my life was not a grand, cinematic heist. It was 1,000 petty, agonizing larcenies. I slowly began to bleed out the normal, grounding elements of a basic human existence. It started with the Sunday evening dinners at my parents' house. I just have to finish this one forecasting model for the Monday briefing, I would tell my mother over the phone, my voice tight with manufactured urgency while staring at a mountain of unread emails. Then, it was my best friend's 30th birthday weekend trip to the mountains. I paid my share for the cabin but spent the entire Saturday huddled in the corner of a loud coffee shop in Asheville, desperately trying to salvage a critical vendor contract Dana had entirely neglected to review. The most painful, lingering fracture was my older sister's engagement party. I arrived 3 hours late, completely missing the emotional toasts and the dinner, because a critical route optimization algorithm had failed, and Dana had strictly instructed me over a text message that failure was simply not an option this quarter. I walked into the beautifully decorated venue with dark, bruised circles under my eyes, smelling of stale office coffee and raw anxiety, while my family looked at me with a devastating mixture of pity and quiet, building resentment. Even the fundamental human necessity of sleep became a myth. I survived on 4 fragmented hours a night, my brain constantly vibrating with unsent messages, pending deadlines, and the phantom ringing of my phone. My closest colleague, Brenna Cole, tried to throw me a lifeline before I completely drowned. Brenna sat 2 desks down and had masterfully perfected the art of doing exactly enough to stay employed without ever drawing the dangerous attention of upper management. One gloomy Tuesday morning, as we were washing out our ceramic mugs in the bleak, windowless employee kitchenette, she leaned in close, the smell of burnt microwave oatmeal hanging in the air. "You have to stop giving her everything, Chloe," Brenna whispered, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder toward the glass-walled offices. "Dana does this every single time. It is her playbook. She scans the team, identifies the most competent, driven person who desperately wants to prove themselves, and then she pushes them right to the absolute edge of their sanity. She drains them dry, uses their flawless output to make herself look like a visionary leader, and labels the whole abusive process as building leadership capacity. You are not her protégé. Chloe, you are her battery. And when you run out of juice, she will just throw you away and plug in someone new." I had stubbornly dismissed Brenna's warning. I had proudly told myself that Brenna just did not understand the fierce hustle required to break through the glass ceiling. I thought I was stronger than the people who had quit before me. To the outside observer, and especially to the wealthy men sitting on the executive board, Dana Mercer was an absolute, undisputed rising star. She possessed an uncanny predatory instinct for optics. She knew exactly which trending management buzzwords to drop casually in an elevator pitch. She maintained a flawlessly curated professional image, always appearing calm, collected, and completely in control. Most importantly, she possessed an almost supernatural sense of timing, always managing to stroll into the boardroom just as a massive operational crisis I had spent 72 hours fixing was finally resolved. This allowed her to deliver the good news to the CEO with a calm, reassuring smile, positioning herself as the savior of the quarter, The executives viewed her as a vital, stabilizing force. They had absolutely no idea she was simply the polished hood ornament on a massive, heavy vehicle I was pushing uphill with my bare, bleeding hands. Looking back at the wreckage of my 31st year on Earth, sitting in the oppressive silence of that office after she had stolen my promotion, I finally confronted the most terrifying truth of all. The worst part was not that I had been ruthlessly exploited by a corporate parasite. That happens every single day in corporate America. The most horrifying aspect of the entire ordeal was how deeply I had been complicit in my own psychological destruction. I had actively helped Dana build the invisible prison I was trapped inside. I had taken the raw, ugly reality of chronic overwork, stolen credit, and severe emotional manipulation, and I had taught myself to dress it up in beautiful, empowering vocabulary. I called my bone-deep exhaustion unwavering commitment. I called my crushing anxiety a unique opportunity for growth. I called being blatantly used and discarded, waiting patiently for the right timing. I had been the perfect, infinitely compliant victim because I had successfully convinced myself I was a brave warrior fighting a noble battle for my future. But the battle was a complete lie. The promised promotion was a ghost, and the only thing I had actually built over the past 12 months was a flawless, highly efficient engine for my own continuous destruction. I returned to my apartment just past 8 o'clock in the evening. It felt less like a home and more like a high-priced, temperature-controlled storage locker where I occasionally collapsed to sleep. A fine layer of dust coated the neglected surfaces of my living room. My refrigerator contained only a half-empty bottle of sparkling water and a forgotten sealed container of takeout from 2 weeks ago. I dropped my keys on the granite counter, the sharp metallic clatter echoing off the bare walls. The silence of the empty rooms was deafening. I sat down heavily on my gray sofa, flipped open my personal laptop, and created a new, blank document. I typed the words, "Letter of Resignation," at the top of the page. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. It felt far too easy. It felt like letting a thief walk away with my wallet simply because I was too tired to chase them down the street. Before I surrendered, I needed to see exactly how much she had taken. I logged into the Oraline Transit System's secure virtual private network. I navigated deep into the labyrinth of the executive shared drives, bypassing the daily operational folders and accessing a read-only directory Dana used to archive official board submissions. I wanted to look at the final, polished versions of my stolen weekends. I opened a massive 70-page digital document titled Quarterly Operational Optimization Strategy. Dana had presented this exact strategy to the steering committee 3 months prior. During that town hall presentation, she had explicitly credited a boutique external consulting firm called Norval Advisory for the heavy lifting, claiming she had merely directed their external genius to align with our internal goals. I downloaded the file to my local desktop and ran a basic metadata extraction tool I frequently used for auditing vendor contracts. The black screen populated with the hidden digital fingerprint of the document. The original author tag embedded in the code did not say Norval Advisory. It did not say Dana Mercer. Hidden beneath the polished corporate branding and the executive summaries, the core creation registry displayed my own employee identification number. The exact creation timestamp was recorded as 1:13 in the morning on a Sunday. I vividly remembered that specific night. I remembered the freezing rain lashing against my bedroom window as I desperately built those complex pivot tables, terrified that I would miss Dana's arbitrary Monday morning deadline. I immediately abandoned the resignation letter. I became a digital archaeologist, quietly excavating the ruins of my own stolen life. I spent the next 4 hours pulling down every major report, every risk assessment, and every routing playbook Dana had submitted over the past year. I painstakingly cross-referenced the final executive files with the raw working drafts hidden deep in my own encrypted subfolders. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. File names had been cleverly altered. The visible owner properties had been carefully scrubbed and replaced, but the foundational architecture of the work was undeniably mine. I found the exact same custom macro scripts I had written from scratch to automate the transit logs. I recognized my specific, idiosyncratic habit of using a double space after a semicolon in the legal footnotes. I even found a minor typographical error on page 42 of a major vendor pitch document. I had accidentally misspelled the word logistics as logistics in a hidden alternative text field for an image. The supposedly elite, high-priced consultants at Norval Advisory had perfectly replicated my invisible typo. I opened a new, highly encrypted spreadsheet on my personal hard drive. This document was not for Aureline. It was for me. I began constructing an exhaustive, terrifyingly detailed ledger of my exploitation. Column A was the actual task I performed. Column B documented the precise hours I worked, strictly cross-referenced with my building badge swipes and my remote login logs. Column C contained the exact email directives from Dana, usually sent late at night, ordering me to execute the work under the guise of an emergency. Column D listed the final, altered document where another entity officially took the credit. Column E tracked every single instance where Dana had explicitly delegated a Tier 1 management duty down to my desk without providing the corresponding authority. I had to be surgical. I knew that if the IT department detected a massive, sudden download of executive files, I could be locked out of the system in minutes. I began taking high-resolution screenshots of the metadata properties, ensuring I captured the system clock and my login credentials in the frame to prove authenticity. I routed copies of Dana's incriminating late-night demands to a secure partitioned external drive. I downloaded my entire corporate calendar, meticulously matching every hour I spent executing my stretch assignments against Dana's marked out-of-office periods and lengthy executive lunches. I was not just venting frustration anymore. I was silently building a watertight digital vault of evidence. The true gravity of what I was uncovering did not fully crystallize until the following afternoon. I had stepped away from my desk to get a cup of bitter office coffee. Gabe Holloway, a senior analyst from the finance department, was leaning against the counter, aggressively tapping the side of the espresso machine. Gabe was notoriously chatty and chronically stressed about corporate budgets. They want us to cut department travel by 20%, but they refuse to touch the external vendor budgets, Gabe complained, pouring a packet of artificial sweetener into his paper cup. I was just processing the quarterly invoices. We are bleeding cash on these strategic consultants. Norval Advisory A1 billed us over $85,000 last month just for the routing playbook update. And I hear half the floor complaining they are doing the work of 3 people anyway. It makes absolutely no sense. I froze. My hand tightened around my ceramic mug until my knuckles turned completely white. $85,000 for the routing playbook update. That was the exact playbook I had spent 3 grueling weeks writing entirely by myself, fueled by vending machine snacks and pure panic, while Dana repeatedly assured me it was a critical internal test of my leadership readiness. 85,000, I repeated, forcing my voice to remain entirely flat, casual, and conversational. That is a steep price for a playbook. Tell me about it, Gabe sighed, taking a sip and grimacing at the taste. And their invoices are always so incredibly vague, just broad-line items for operational consulting and strategic alignment. But Dana signs off on them immediately, so accounts payable just pushes the money right through the system. Anyway, back to the spreadsheet mines. Gabe walked away down the hall, completely unaware that he had just handed me the Rosetta Stone of my misery. I stood alone in the low hum of the fluorescent-lit break room, a cold, sharp chill racing down my spine. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. This was no longer a simple, tragic story about a toxic middle manager taking credit for her subordinates' hard work. Taking credit was a moral failing. Taking credit to feed an ego was just standard corporate bullying. But taking my internal, salaried labor, packaging it up behind closed doors, and having an external company submit a massive, 5-figure invoice for that exact same work. That was a fundamentally different game. That crossed the solid black line from bad management directly into potential corporate fraud. If Orlean Transit Systems was paying Norval Advisory tens of thousands of dollars for reports that I was generating for free on my living room couch at 2 in the morning. Where was that massive stream of money actually going? Why was Dana so fiercely protective of this specific vendor? Why was she so utterly desperate to keep me buried deep in the granular details, entirely isolated from the executive level, and constantly overwhelmed with artificial manufactured emergencies? I walked slowly back to my desk, my vision tunneling, blocking out the noise of the open-plan office. I looked across the floor toward Dana's corner office. She was on a phone call, laughing lightly, casually twirling a silver pen between her manicured fingers. The familiar aura of the demanding, difficult boss completely dissolved before my eyes. The woman sitting safely behind that soundproof glass wall was not just incompetent or manipulative. She was actively concealing a massive financial lie, and she was using my stolen life, my panic, and my desperate desire to succeed as the perfect, invisible shield to do it. I sat down, opened my encrypted hard drive, and began the quiet, meticulous work of tracing the money. While Dana was busy hoarding stolen credit in the sterile executive suites, she completely missed the actual, concrete foundation I was quietly pouring beneath her feet. During those 12 agonizing months of forced isolation and relentless grunt work, I had accidentally amassed the single most valuable currency in the logistics industry, a currency Dana fundamentally lacked absolute, unshakable trust from the people actually running the transit lines. When the automated freight routing software crashed in the Atlanta sector at 2 in the morning, the regional depot managers did not dial Dana's carefully curated professional business number. They bypassed the official chain of command entirely and texted my personal phone. They knew Dana would offer them empty corporate platitudes, demand a detailed incident report, and schedule a post-mortem review for the following week while their loading docks backed up. They knew I would manually reboot the servers, trace the data flow error, and give them a straight, unfiltered answer in 5 minutes. I had become the invisible central nervous system of Oraline Transit Systems. The dispatchers, the shift supervisors, the logistics coordinators, they all reported to Dana on paper, but in reality, they answered directly to me. I never spoke in corporate circles or offered vague promises. I spoke in system uptime, route clearances, and immediate solutions. This invisible authority did not go unnoticed outside our internal walls. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a direct message from an unfamiliar number. It was Elena Voss, the Director of Strategic Operations at Crestfall Route Labs, a highly respected competitor that occasionally partnered with us on complex cross-state logistics. Elena invited me for coffee, choosing a dimly lit, independent roastery 3 blocks away from the Oraline campus to ensure absolute privacy. Elena was nothing like Dana. She wore no makeup, possessed a sharp, calculating gaze, and carried the grounded aura of someone who had actually built supply chains from the mud up. She did not bother with pleasantries or networking small talk. "I read the emergency integration playbook you sent over last month during the server migration," Elena said, setting her black coffee on the wooden table. "Your boss tried to pass it off as a joint committee output during the executive brief, but I know exactly how these things work. Committees do not write with that kind of tactical precision. The person who wrote this actually understands operations, not just how to stand in a boardroom." Those words hit me with the physical force of a heavy strike to the chest. It was the absolute, undeniable validation I had been starving for. Delivered not as a manipulative carrot to keep me working, but as a simple, objective statement of fact. Hearing a true industry veteran recognize my invisible labor instantly validated my worth. Elena casually slid a sleek, embossed business card across the table, mentioning her department was actively recruiting real leadership and that I should seriously consider my options. The prospect of a new, higher-paying job was thrilling, but it was not the offer that anchored me to my chair. It was the profound, earth-shattering realization that my competence was highly visible to anyone who actually knew what to look for. Dana had spent a year convincing me I was small, but out in the real world, my shadow was massive. The next piece of my tactical awakening arrived through a secure, encrypted messaging app later that week. My closest colleague, Brenna, had noticed my sudden, chilling shift in demeanor. Recognizing that I was no longer buying into the company line, she decided it was finally safe to share her own private archive. Sitting in the cold glow of my dual monitors, I opened a series of image files Brenna had discreetly forwarded to my personal device. They were screenshots of Dana's secondary social media accounts from a private profile, meticulously cross-referenced with the exact dates and times of our most severe operational crises. I stared at a vibrant photograph of Dana holding a crystal champagne flute in a first-class airport lounge, time-stamped at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Next to the photograph, Brenna had attached the text message Dana had sent our team group chat at that exact same minute. Team, I am brewing my third pot of coffee. We are burning the midnight oil together on this rollout. Keep pushing. I am right here with you. I swiped to the next file. Another photo showed Dana lounging at a luxury golf resort in South Carolina on a Saturday afternoon, perfectly aligned with the weekend she claimed to be locked in an intense vendor negotiation war room, leaving me to field the furious client escalation calls entirely alone. The audacity of the lie was no longer hurtful, it was purely clinical. I was observing a parasite operating in its natural habitat. Dana was not a confused manager. She was a predator who had perfected the art of virtual presence while physically abandoning her post. With my eyes finally open, the overarching architecture of Dana's recent tyranny snapped into perfect, terrifying focus. I began paying much closer attention to the redacted calendar invites on the executive schedules, the hushed conversations near the private elevators, and the sudden frantic push for flawless data compliance from the legal department. It did not take long to uncover the massive, beating heart of the entire deception. Oralline Transit Systems was in the final, delicate stages of securing a massive capital investment from Stonevale Capital, a ruthless private equity firm known for completely gutting operational inefficiencies before injecting cash. The pieces fell into place with the cold precision of a falling guillotine. Dana's department, the supposed crown jewel of Oraline's logistics network, was the primary operational proof point for the entire investment deal. Stonevale's aggressive auditors were circling the building, demanding flawless performance metrics, robust crisis playbooks, and evidence of a highly scalable team. That was the real reason Dana had been squeezing my group with the ruthless intensity of an industrial vice over the past 3 months. She was not building leadership capacity, and she certainly was not preparing me for a promotion. She was desperately erecting a magnificent, flawless theatrical set to secure the Stonevale investment. She fully intended to ride the wave of my exhaustion, lock in her massive executive retention bonus when the deal closed, and solidify her untouchable status. I remained utterly motionless in my cubicle, aware of the even, composed beat of my own pulse. The entire board had become clear to me now, and I held every means for a quiet, dignified departure. I could accept Elena Voss's offer tomorrow, double my salary, secure a real leadership title, and walk away from Oralline Transit Systems forever. I could leave Dana to successfully close her fraudulent deal and move on with my life. But as my eyes drifted across the vast, gray expanse of the open plan office, they landed on a young, eager junior analyst sitting near the network printer. Her name was Tessa, and she was only 23 years old. Her shoulders were already slumped under the invisible weight of a massive weekend data entry assignment. She was rubbing her tired eyes, desperately trying to prove her worth to a company that would gladly consume her youth. If I vanished quietly into the night, Dana might face a temporary setback, but she would ultimately survive the due diligence phase. She would simply pivot her predatory gaze, select a younger, more trusting target like Tessa, and the crushing cycle of exploitation would immediately restart. The machine would keep grinding bones into dust. I realized that surviving a predator is entirely different from stopping one. I did not just want to escape the board anymore. I wanted to permanently flip the table. If Dana's entire career survival depended on the illusion that she was the operational genius driving this department, then I was the only person holding the strings to that illusion. I closed my laptop, the quiet click sounding exactly like a heavy lock snapping securely into place. I was not going to run to Crestfall Root Labs just yet. I was going to stay right here, and I was going to patiently watch Dana Mercer build her beautiful, expensive house of cards as high as she possibly could, right up until the very moment I decided to pull out the foundation. I did not march into the Human Resources Department, and I certainly did not burst into Dana's corner office to deliver a righteous, cinematic speech about my newly discovered boundaries. That would have given her exactly what she wanted, an emotional outburst she could easily categorize as a junior employee cracking under the pressure of the industry. Instead, I simply became fiercely, rigidly compliant with the exact parameters of my actual job description. The rebellion began with total professional silence. Whenever Dana swung by my cubicle to casually drop a massive, undocumented problem in my lap, expecting me to handle it on the fly, I no longer nodded and started typing. I would look up from my dual monitors, smile politely, and say, "I am currently finishing the compliance audit you prioritized this morning. Could you please send me an email detailing this new request so I can accurately document the shift in my workflow?" She hated it. I could see the tiny muscle in her jaw twitch every single time I asked for a digital paper trail, but she could not refuse without sounding utterly incompetent to anyone walking by. The verbal, invisible crises that used to consume my afternoons and erase my evenings were now forcibly dragged into the harsh, undeniable light of a written record. I also instituted a new, revolutionary personal policy. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I packed up my leather tote bag, shut down my computer, and walked out of the double glass doors exactly at 6 o'clock in the evening. It was a terrifyingly small adjustment, yet it was more than enough to send massive shockwaves through the delicate, parasitic ecosystem Dana had constructed. For a solid year, my unconditional, unlimited availability had been the secret glue holding the department's fractured timelines together. Without me sitting there to silently patch the gaping operational holes after hours, the machinery immediately began to grind and spark. The first real stress test of my new boundaries arrived late on a Friday evening. It was precisely 9:15 at night when my cell phone illuminated on my living room coffee table, vibrating violently against the wood. The caller identification flashed Dana's name. In the past, my heart would have hammered in my chest, and I would have scrambled for my laptop before the third ring, consumed by a manufactured sense of duty. Tonight, I sat perfectly still on my sofa, sipping a glass of water, and simply watched the screen go dark. A minute later, a frantic text message arrived. "Chloe, we have a massive data synchronization failure on the regional transit logs. The dashboard is completely down. I need you to log in immediately and run a hard reset before the Saturday morning dispatch." I picked up my phone and typed a calm, measured reply. "Hi, Dana. I see the alert. Per the standard operating procedure manual, any system rollback outside of regular business hours requires documented approval from the Director of Operations detailing the exact server parameters and risk assessment. Please send the authorization form to my email, and I will execute the reset." My phone went completely silent. Dana could not send the authorization form because she had absolutely no idea what the specific server parameters were, let alone how to assess the digital risk. She had spent the last 12 months presenting my technical summaries to the executive board, but she could not actually navigate the back-end architecture if her entire career depended on it. The consequences exploded the following morning. At 8 o'clock on Saturday, a mandatory emergency conference call was initiated by the furious regional dispatch managers. Because I had strictly adhered to protocol, the data failure had not been magically fixed in the dark. Dana was forced to join the bridge line and lead the troubleshooting effort herself. I logged into the call from my kitchen table and placed my microphone on mute, listening intently as the illusion of her competence publicly unraveled. "Dana, we are flying blind out here," a senior dispatcher barked over the static of the line. "What is the status of the data migration?" "We are looking into the core integration matrix right now," Dana offered, utilizing her usual, soothing corporate buzzwords in a desperate attempt to regain control. We just need to recalibrate the data flow. Recalibrate what? Exactly, the dispatcher snapped back, clearly losing his patience with the empty rhetoric. Is it a gateway timeout error or a corrupt cache? We need technical specifics, Dana, not a high-level strategy pitch. The ensuing silence on the line was magnificent. It was thick, heavy, and undeniably awkward. Dana stammered, attempting to deflect the question back to the software vendor, but her absolute lack of fundamental technical knowledge was glaringly exposed to a dozen key operational leaders. She eventually had to publicly ask me to explain the exact nature of the failure, which I did, speaking in a slow, clear, entirely factual tone that offered her no protective cover. Instead of reprimanding me for my lack of Friday night heroics, Dana executed a sharp, desperate pivot. She realized that fear and pressure were no longer effective tools for controlling me. So she immediately switched to corporate love bombing. On Monday morning, she started copying upper management on emails praising my analytical skills. She suddenly nominated me for a company-wide internal culture award, citing my unwavering dedication to the Oraline mission. She even pulled me aside near the break room, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, intimate whisper. "You handled that call brilliantly on Saturday, Chloe," she murmured, offering a warm smile. "Just hold the line for a few more weeks until this investment deal with Stonevale Capital is finalized. There is a very big, very lucrative role waiting for you on the other side of this transition." It was a beautifully constructed trap, but I was no longer the naive girl who would blindly step into it. In fact, her sudden burst of affection provided me with the most lethal ammunition I had gathered thus far. In her desperate attempt to flatter me into submission and keep me working, Dana began sending detailed, glowing emails that explicitly outlined my actual responsibilities. She wrote things like, "Chloe continues to masterfully coordinate the team's entire operational rhythm," and "Thank you, Chloe, for independently managing the vendor deployment pipeline this quarter." She thought she was buying my loyalty with cheap praise. In reality, she was meticulously documenting her own fraud. By putting those exact phrases in writing, Dana was indirectly but undeniably confessing to the executive board that I had been single-handedly executing the exact management duties she claimed as her own, all without the proper title, authority, or financial compensation. Every single compliment she typed was a nail securely driven into her own coffin. As the weeks progressed, the atmosphere in the office grew incredibly tense. By simply doing exactly what my job description dictated and absolutely nothing more, the entire department began to visibly fracture. Major project deadlines, which used to be flawlessly met through my invisible, unpaid midnight labor, started to slip. Minor compliance issues snowballed into glaring operational bottlenecks that caught the attention of the legal team. My colleagues, who had always assumed the department ran smoothly because Dana was a brilliant director, slowly began to notice the undeniable correlation between my strict adherence to working hours and the sudden chaos engulfing our workflow. Tessa, the young junior analyst, watched in quiet awe as I calmly packed my bag at 6 o'clock, while the rest of the team panicked over an impending audit. For the first time, everyone in the open plan office could clearly see just how much of the sky had been held up by one exhausted person who was finally refusing to carry the weight. I did not sabotage a single spreadsheet. I did not delete a single file, whisper a single rumor, or intentionally delay a single project. I merely stopped acting as the invisible, shock-absorbing pillar holding up Dana's fraudulent empire. And as I quietly stepped back, leaving her to support her own weight, the entire ceiling of Oraline transit systems began to violently shake. The deeper I dug into the encrypted architecture of Oraline transit systems, the colder my blood ran. This was no longer a simple case of a lazy middle manager stealing my presentation slides to look good in front of the executives. The digital breadcrumbs I was meticulously sweeping together were forming a terrifying, highly illegal picture. I spent 3 consecutive evenings cross-referencing system server logs with the official executive filings. That was when I discovered the compliance certificates. In our industry, Deploying a new dispatch routing system is not merely a software update, it is a massive liability. Every single deployment requires a comprehensive ready-for-launch certification, a legally binding document verifying that all operational risks have been thoroughly audited and mitigated. I had personally built the technical templates for these risk audits. I had spent countless late-night hours running the stress tests, checking the server redundancies, and populating the highly technical data fields. When I pulled up the finalized documents submitted to the executive board and the external insurance underwriters, my stomach dropped. Dana had taken my raw templates, completely bypassed the mandatory secondary managerial review process, and digitally forged her signature at the bottom. She was signing off on millions of dollars of operational risk, as if she had personally combed through the firewall architectures and stress-tested the server loads. She was not just stealing my work, she was using my competence to sign off on risks she had not actually reviewed. If one of those dispatch systems crashed and caused a major transit accident, my invisible data was the only thing standing between Auraline and a massive federal lawsuit. Yet Dana was wearing the legal crown without understanding a single line of the code. But the forged compliance certificates were only the beginning. The true horror lay buried deep in the vendor payment registry. Following the breadcrumbs, Gabe Holloway had inadvertently dropped. I accessed the accounts payable dashboard. I pulled up the digitized invoices submitted by Norval Advisory over the past 18 months. I placed them side by side on my dual monitors with my own local computer directories. The level of sheer, unadulterated brazenness was breathtaking. The descriptions of services rendered on the Norval invoices were not just similar to my work, they were identical. I had a habit of using highly specific, slightly eccentric naming conventions for my late-night project folders to keep myself organized. A folder I had created at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, titled Regional Fleet Optimization Protocol Phase 2, appeared word for word as a massive line item charge on a Norval invoice dated just 3 days later. A complex data migration script I had casually named Database Lifeboat Strategy was billed as a premium, $20,000 consulting service. Norval was not consulting. Norval was simply copy-pasting my personal computer directories and attaching a 5-figure price tag. The final damning piece of the puzzle arrived completely by accident on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was waiting by the network printer for a dense compliance manual to finish printing. Gabe from finance walked up, clutching a stack of returned mail. "The post office is driving me insane," Gabe muttered, aggressively tapping a thick envelope against the edge of the printer. "I am trying to mail the physical tax forms to our vendors, but the address we have on file for Norval Advisory is just a tiny, shared co-working space downtown. The receptionist there said they barely ever pick up their mail. And getting their point of contact to answer the phone is impossible. Do you know a guy named Arthur Vance? He is listed as their primary billing director." I kept my face entirely neutral, locking my jaw so my expression would not betray the sudden, violent spike in my heart rate. "The name does not ring a bell," I replied smoothly, picking up my freshly printed manual. "Have you tried asking Dana? She works closely with them. I will shoot her an email." Gabe sighed, turning away. I walked back to my desk with a roaring sound rushing in my ears. Arthur Vance. I knew exactly who Arthur Vance was. 6 months ago, during a rare moment of forced office socialization, Dana had shown me pictures from her older sister's extravagant destination wedding in Napa Valley. She had complained bitterly about the cost of the bridesmaid dresses and mentioned her new brother-in-law, a man who had recently pivoted to independent consulting. His name was Arthur Vance. I sat down heavily in my ergonomic chair. I did not immediately jump to wild conclusions of a massive nepotism scandal, but the terrifying geometry of the situation was impossible to ignore. A phantom consulting firm, registered to an empty co-working space, operated by Dana's brother-in-law, was billing Auraline Transit Systems tens of thousands of dollars for the exact administrative and strategic labor I was being forced to execute for free under the guise of leadership training. If this was verified, it was not an internal human resources violation. It was the kind of financial misconduct that could trigger a major internal investigation and serious legal consequences. I knew I was holding a live grenade. If I pulled the pin incorrectly, the explosion would easily wipe me out right alongside her. I needed absolute surgical precision. I left the office exactly at 6 o'clock, drove to a quiet park on the outskirts of the city, and dialed the number of Marcus, my former mentor from my early days in the logistics sector. Marcus was a seasoned industry veteran who had survived countless corporate bloodbaths. I sat in my parked car, watching the rain streak the windshield, and laid out the entire terrifying tapestry of evidence without naming Dana or the company. Marcus was silent for a long, heavy minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was gravely serious. "Do not strike with emotion, Chloe," Marcus warned, his tone sharp and steady. "Corporate structures are designed to protect management and crush emotional whistleblowers. If you go in there angry, they will label you disgruntled and bury you. You cannot be the victim in this story. You have to be the auditor. Let the data speak entirely for itself. You are merely the precise narrator pointing at the numbers. If you want to survive this, your documentation must be completely undeniable." I absorbed his words, feeling the last lingering remnants of my anger harden into a cold, diamond-like focus. That weekend, I did not sleep. I transformed my small dining table into a war room. I began meticulously separating the massive mountain of digital evidence into 3 distinct, highly organized categories. The first category was labor exploitation and role abuse. This contained the terrifyingly long list of my actual working hours, my building badge swipes, and the endless stream of midnight directives from Dana pushing high-level management duties onto my desk without the corresponding title or pay. The second category was intellectual property theft. This was the forensic documentation of the stolen work. I paired the original metadata of my files, complete with creation timestamps and my unique author codes, alongside the finalized, fraudulently signed documents Dana had submitted to the executive board. The third, and most dangerous, category was suspicious external vendor activity. Here, I placed the Norval advisory invoices side by side with my own project folder names. I included Gabe's offhand email confirming the empty co-working space address, and a publicly available marriage registry record I had pulled from a California state database linking Arthur Vance to Dana's immediate family. I built the entire dossier like a seasoned prosecutor preparing for a massive federal trial. It was clean, chronological, and completely devoid of personal opinion. Every single piece of evidence was strictly accompanied by the operational context, the intended recipient of the lie, the direct financial or legal impact on Oraline transit systems, and a concise explanation of why this specific breach of trust mattered to the overall health of the company. I printed the entire document on heavy, high-quality paper and bound it in a simple, unassuming black folder. Sitting at my dining table on Sunday morning, staring at the physical weight of the black folder resting under my hands, the fundamental nature of my retaliation shifted permanently. This was no longer a personal crusade to make Dana Mercer feel the sting of humiliation. It was no longer about getting a retroactive promotion or securing an apology for my stolen weekends. It had evolved into a profound moral imperative. The company, despite its flaws, was filled with decent, hard-working people who were sacrificing their lives to keep the transit lines moving. If I simply took a new job and walked away in silence, I would be leaving the vault door wide open for a predator. I would be allowing a deeply corrupt, parasitic model to continue eating the company from the inside out. Worse, I would be abandoning Tessa and the other junior staff to be slowly crushed under the exact same machine that had nearly broken me. I was no longer fighting for my own career. I was fighting to burn the machine down to the ground. The official offer from Crestfall Root Labs arrived in my personal inbox on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was not a tentative proposal or a vague promise over coffee. It was a formal, legally binding contract attached as a secure electronic document. I opened it while sitting at my kitchen island, holding my breath. The title printed at the top of the first page was Director of Operational Resilience. The compensation package was staggering, offering a base salary of $160,000 a year, which was nearly double what I was currently making to do the exact same level of work in the shadows. But the money was not the most intoxicating part of the document. The contract explicitly outlined a generous hiring budget, giving me the immediate authority to build my own dedicated team. It promised an actual seat at the executive table and guaranteed a civilized schedule. I stared at the glowing screen for a very long time. The golden door was standing wide open. The escape route I had been desperately praying for was finally right in front of me. I knew with absolute certainty that I could print the contract, sign my name on the dotted line, and cleanly sever my ties with Oraline Transit Systems. I could submit a polite, generic 2-week notice, pack my personal belongings into a cardboard box, and walk out of the glass doors without ever looking back. I would never have to deal with Dana Mercer, her fabricated emergencies, or her corporate gaslighting for another single day of my life. The temptation to simply vanish and protect my own peace was overwhelmingly powerful. But the universe has a strange way of testing our resolve, just when the exit sign illuminates. The very next afternoon, I was returning from the break room with a glass of water when I stopped dead in my tracks. Through the gaps in the gray fabric partitions, I saw Dana standing next to the desk of Tessa Wynn. Tessa was our newest junior operations analyst. She was 23 years old, incredibly eager, fiercely intelligent, and deeply desperate to make a good impression in her first corporate job. She frequently skipped her lunch breaks and was always the first person to volunteer for extra data entry. Dana was leaning over Tessa's shoulder, using the exact same soft, maternal, conspiratorial tone she had weaponized against me for an entire year. "Tessa, you have such incredible raw talent," Dana murmured, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "I want to give you a special stretch assignment. It is a massive data mapping project for the upcoming network expansion. It is technically management-level work, and it will probably require a few late nights this week, but it is the perfect opportunity for you to build your leadership profile. I am giving this to you because I see so much of myself in you." Tessa looked up at her, her young face glowing with a heartbreaking mixture of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated pride. "Thank you so much, Dana," Tessa replied, her voice practically trembling with gratitude. "I will not let you down. I can start working on it tonight." I felt a cold, sharp blade twist deep inside my stomach. I was looking into a mirror reflecting my own painful past. I saw my own naive desperation, my own misplaced loyalty, and my own inevitable destruction mapped out perfectly on Tessa's tired, smiling face. Dana had not missed a single beat, because I had successfully established my boundaries and stopped acting as her invisible shield. She was simply pivoting her predatory gaze to the next available food source. She was seamlessly migrating the crushing weight of her own incompetence onto a younger, cheaper, more vulnerable target. That brief interaction in the cubicle aisle fundamentally changed the gravity of my situation. My carefully constructed dossier of evidence was no longer just a tool for my personal vindication. If I took the Crestfall job and quietly walked away, my silence would be the very thing that allowed Dana to survive the upcoming Stonevale Capital Investment merger. She would successfully secure her massive retention bonus, solidify her executive power, and immediately proceed to grind Tessa down to the bone over the next 12 months. Leaving peacefully meant I was abandoning another woman to the exact same psychological prison I had just barely escaped. I simply could not pack my bags and walk away knowing the monster was still eating the villagers. On Thursday morning, I made my final choice. I opened the Crestfall contract, digitally signed my name to accept the Director of Operational Resilience position, and quietly emailed it back to Elena Voss. I was officially leaving. But I was not going to leave the building intact for the person who had tried to bury me. I spent the next 2 hours perfecting the digital equivalent of my physical black folder. I wanted to ensure my retaliatory strike was completely devoid of raw emotion, bitter resentment, or personal vengeance. I did not want to tear Oraline Transit Systems apart out of spite. The company itself provided a livelihood for hundreds of good people. My goal was profound: surgical clarity. I wanted the undeniable truth to be dragged into the harsh boardroom light before the executives officially handed Dana any more structural power. I drafted a meticulously professional cover letter. I did not demand financial compensation for my unpaid overtime. I did not ask for a retroactive promotion, nor did I use inflammatory words like fraud or theft. I simply stated that I was officially tendering my resignation, and that as part of my final fiduciary duty to the company, I was submitting a comprehensive audit of current departmental vulnerabilities. I outlined the severe, impending risks the company faced regarding the forged compliance certificates, the dangerous lack of actual managerial oversight on critical systems, and the highly irregular financial anomalies surrounding the Norval advisory invoices. At the very bottom of the document, I stated my final date of employment. The most critical part of the execution was the delivery method. If I submitted the dossier directly to Dana, she would instantly delete it and fire me for insubordination. If I only sent it to my assigned human resources representative, the complaint would likely be buried in bureaucratic red tape or intercepted by Dana's allies. I needed an immediate, undeniable multi-departmental detonation. I created a single, highly encrypted email. In the recipient line, I meticulously typed the direct addresses of 3 specific individuals. First, Lila Boone, the Global Director of Human Resources. Second, Maris Vale, the company's General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer. Third, Nora Kincaid, the uncompromising head of internal audit. By sending the exact same explosive documentation to the heads of legal, human resources, and financial compliance at the exact same second, I effectively eliminated any possibility of a cover-up. If one department tried to sweep it under the rug, the other 2 would legally have to intervene. They would be forced to hold each other accountable. I attached the massive, heavily documented data file. I sat back in my chair, staring at the blue send button on the screen. The open-plan office hummed with the mundane sounds of ringing phones and clacking keyboards, completely oblivious to the massive storm I was about to unleash. I knew the exact magnitude of what I was doing. From the precise second I clicked that button, there would be absolutely no turning back, no apologies, and no peaceful resolutions. It was a zero-sum game. Either the undeniable weight of my evidence would bring Dana Mercer's entire fraudulent empire crashing down to the floor, or she would use her remaining executive leverage to brutally annihilate my professional reputation across the entire logistics industry before I even reached the parking lot. I took one final, deep breath, letting the cool, recycled office air fill my lungs. I thought about the stolen weekends, the forged signatures, the phantom invoices, and the tired, hopeful look on Tessa's face. I reached out, pressed down on the mouse, and clicked send. Exactly 48 hours. That was precisely how long it took for the invisible tremors of my encrypted dossier to begin rattling the foundations of the executive floor. While the legal and internal audit departments were quietly processing the massive explosive device I had dropped in their laps, they clearly instituted a strict gag order. Dana had not been formally notified of my resignation or the pending fraud investigation, but she possessed the distinct, primal intuition of a cornered predator. She could feel the sudden, drastic shift in the atmospheric pressure. She could sense that her control over me had completely evaporated. On Wednesday morning, her attitude aggressively pivoted from cold indifference to a sickeningly sweet desperation. She materialized at my cubicle at 11 o'clock, leaning casually against the gray fabric partition. "Chloe, you have been working so incredibly hard," Dana purred, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "Let me take you out for a proper lunch today, my treat. We need to talk about your brilliant future here." We walked to an upscale, dimly lit Italian bistro 2 blocks from the Oraline campus. Dana ordered a $40 plate of truffle risotto and immediately launched into her carefully rehearsed psychological offensive. She leaned across the small table, lowering her voice to project an air of deep, exclusive trust. "You are the absolute backbone of this department, Chloe," she whispered, locking her eyes onto mine. "I know the past 12 months have been a massive grind, but the Stonevale Capital investment is entering the final due diligence phase next week. If you can just hold the line and keep your spirits up for one more quarter, I am personally putting together a massive retention package for you. We will finally get you that management title you have deserved for so long." It was the exact same beautifully wrapped lie she had used to steal my weekends for an entire year. The only difference was that today, I could clearly see the sheer panic hiding just behind her polished smile. I did not break eye contact. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and offered a completely flat, unreadable response. "I appreciate you sharing your vision for the next quarter, Dana," I said calmly. "However, I am strictly focused on maintaining my current daily deliverables." The polite rejection landed like a physical blow. The manufactured warmth vanished from Dana's face instantly, replaced by a sharp, calculating coldness. Since the carrot had failed, she immediately reached for the stick. "You need to be very careful about your perspective, Chloe," she warned, her tone dropping into a soft, menacing register. "This industry is incredibly small. Orlean places a very high premium on the duty of loyalty. Jumping ship to a competitor right before a major acquisition closes is universally viewed as highly unprofessional. It is the kind of erratic behavior that permanently stains a reputation." She was openly threatening to blackball me in the logistics sector if I dared to leave. 6 months ago, that threat would have sent me into a blind panic. Today, knowing I already had a signed contract with Crestfall Route Labs safely stored in my personal files, her words were completely hollow. I simply nodded, paid for my own portion of the meal with a $20 bill, and walked back to the office in silence. Dana realized she could no longer manipulate me in person, so she immediately transitioned to covering her own tracks digitally. At exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, a high-priority email landed in my inbox. My blood turned to ice when I saw the recipient list. Dana had copied Owen Pike, the chief financial officer, and 2 other senior vice presidents. The subject line read, "Urgent Risk Mitigation on Integration Deadlines." The email was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. "Hi, Chloe," Dana wrote. "Given your autonomous management of the regional integration branches over the past 2 months, I am noticing some severe timeline drift. We cannot afford these isolated project delays right before the Stonevale audit. Please explain your rationale for pushing the server migration back by 3 weeks, and detail your independent strategy for getting your branches back on schedule." She was publicly building a scapegoat. She was trying to establish a false paper trail proving that I was a rogue employee making unilateral, disastrous decisions, strictly insulating herself from the impending collapse. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I felt a cold, soaring adrenaline. I opened a new reply window, ensured every single executive remained copied, and began attaching my forensic evidence. I attached a pristine, high-resolution document containing 3 previous email chains. "Hi, Dana," I typed, my fingers striking the keys with lethal precision. "To ensure total transparency for the executive team regarding the integration drift, I am strictly following the directives you provided. I have attached your email from October 12th, where you explicitly ordered me to pause the server migration. I have also attached your message from November 3rd, where you denied my request for additional technical resources. As my role does not possess the authority to override a director's explicit timeline, I await your updated, formal approval to proceed." I hit send. I sat back and watched the digital bomb detonate. Across the open plan office, I could physically hear the sharp gasp of air as Dana opened the email. By attaching her own written words, I had completely trapped her in a public contradiction in front of the chief financial officer. She could not discipline me for following her exact orders, but she also could not explain why she had lied to the executives about my autonomy. But my email was merely a minor skirmish compared to the massive, unseen artillery strike that hit the department less than 2 hours later. The Internal Audit Department, clearly acting on the explosive dossier I had secretly submitted the day before, made their first tactical move. An automated calendar invite populated on Dana's schedule, with a mandatory notification sent to our entire operational group. Nora Kincaid, the uncompromising head of internal audit, was demanding a deep, comprehensive review of all external vendor disbursements. The review was scheduled for the exact same week Stonevale Capital was sending their financial investigators to our headquarters. The timing was a death sentence. Dana had absolutely no room left to breathe, no time to falsify new documents, and zero space to quietly bury the fraudulent Norval advisory invoices. The walls were closing in at terrifying speed. The sheer terror of the impending audit broke Dana's carefully curated facade. She began engaging in frantic, erratic behavior that she had historically avoided at all costs. She started trying to actually do the work. On Thursday morning, she unexpectedly dialed into a highly technical engineering sync. She attempted to micromanage the data flow parameters, desperately trying to prove she had a firm grasp on the system architecture. It was a spectacular, painful disaster. "We need to optimize the cloud bandwidth for the new data points," Dana interrupted, using the terminology completely incorrectly. The lead systems engineer, a blunt man who had zero patience for corporate nonsense, sighed heavily over the speakerphone. "Dana, we do not use external cloud pinging for the regional logs. We use a closed-loop internal server, exactly as Chloe designed it 6 months ago. Are you looking at the correct schematic?" For the first time, the entire team witnessed her stammer, fumble, and completely fail to answer a basic operational question. The protective shield I had provided her for a year was entirely gone, exposing the gaping, undeniable holes in her knowledge. The harder she tried to assert control over the technical details, the more incompetent she appeared to the very people she was supposed to be leading. By Friday afternoon, the atmosphere in the Oraline Transit Systems office had shifted from a state of chronic, dull exhaustion to a suffocating, high-wire tension. The air felt incredibly thin, heavy with the unspoken realization that the entire power dynamic of the department was fundamentally fracturing. Nobody dared to speak above a whisper. Everyone kept their heads down, their eyes darting nervously toward the glass walls of Dana's corner office. They could all feel the massive, undeniable static electricity building in the room. They all knew a devastating lightning strike was coming. They just did not know exactly where, or upon whom, the fire would ultimately fall. The morning of the massive integration meeting with Stonevale Capital broke with a sharp, cloudless, and freezing clarity. I drove to the office in absolute silence, the radio turned completely off, watching the pale light wash over the city skyline. I walked through the sliding glass doors of Oraline Transit Systems at exactly 6:30 in the morning. The massive corporate lobby was still hollow, echoing, and entirely devoid of the usual frantic energy that defined the start of a typical workday. I was not wearing my usual oversized beige sweater and sensible flat shoes, the quiet, comfortable uniform of the invisible corporate workhorse. Instead, I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp, high-collared white silk blouse, my hair pulled back tightly into a severe, immovable knot. My posture was entirely different. I did not hunch over to avoid making eye contact. I walked with my spine perfectly straight. I carried a single, unassuming manila folder in my left hand. It was incredibly thin, containing only 3 crisp sheets of paper. But the heaviest weapon I brought into the building that morning was not made of processed pulp and black ink. The heaviest, most lethal instrument I carried with me was the sheer, undeniable weight of perfect timing. I sat down at my desk in the dim light of the open-plan office. I did not log into the proprietary dispatch servers or check the overnight transit logs. I opened my email client. At exactly 7 o'clock, 1 full hour before the executive floors officially opened for business, I attached my formal letter of resignation and hit send, routing it directly to Dana. Simultaneously, I forwarded a legally binding confirmation of my accepted employment offer from Crestfall Root Labs to Lila Boone in Human Resources and Maris Vale in the General Counsel office. I stated clearly and unequivocally in the text that my departure was immediate, effective as of this precise morning, completely bypassing the standard corporate courtesy of a 2-week notice period. 15 minutes later, the heavy glass door of Dana's corner office practically exploded outward. The loud, violent sound shattered the quiet morning hum of the floor. She marched down the central aisle, her expensive heels striking the thin gray carpet with the frantic, erratic rhythm of a derailed train. When she finally reached my cubicle, her carefully curated, flawlessly professional mask was entirely gone. Her face was completely drained of color. Her skin pulled tight over her cheekbones, and her eyes were wide with a pure, unadulterated terror I had never witnessed before. She knew exactly what today was. Today was the final, grueling operational stress test for the massive Stonevale capital acquisition. Today was the day the ruthless private equity partners demanded to see the raw system architecture, the detailed contingency playbooks, and the underlying mathematical logic behind the beautiful, highly polished dashboards she had been feeding them for the past 3 months. Dana knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that she did not understand a single line of that core logic. She knew I was the only person in the entire building who could successfully pilot the ship through the brutal technical interrogation that was scheduled to begin in exactly 45 minutes. Without me sitting silently right behind her, validating her empty words and whispering the correct technical parameters into her ear, she was going to spectacularly crash and burn in front of the most important people in her career. Dana reached out and grabbed my forearm, her sharp fingernails digging painfully through the fabric of my blazer. She physically pulled me away from my desk chair and dragged me into the narrow, dimly lit hallway, connecting the employee break room to the emergency fire exit. She looked frantically over her shoulder to ensure the corridor was completely empty before she spoke. "Chloe, what in the world are you doing?" Dana hissed, her voice trembling violently, entirely stripped of its usual melodic, soothing control. "You absolutely cannot do this today. Not this morning. The Stonevale partners are already waiting in the lobby downstairs." I looked down at her hand, still clutching my arm like a vice. I did not move. I did not speak a single word. My total, chilling silence forced her to keep talking, to keep desperately thrashing as she drowned in her own rising panic. "Please," Dana practically begged, the word catching in her throat like a jagged stone. "Just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Completely private. I can fix this whole situation right now. I will immediately authorize a 50% raise out of my own departmental budget. I will give you the operations manager title right now, in writing. Before we even walk into the boardroom, I will give you 4 weeks of paid vacation starting tomorrow. Just walk into that room with me today and get me through this final presentation." I slowly reached over with my right hand and removed her grip from my arm, peeling her shaking fingers back one by one. I looked directly into her terrified, wide eyes, the burning anger, the crushing exhaustion, and the bitter resentment that had entirely defined my existence for an entire year were completely gone. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical emptiness. "I will give you 5 minutes," I said, my voice perfectly level, quiet, and devastatingly calm. "But I will absolutely not accept the privacy you are asking for. We will have our 5 minutes inside the main integration room, with every single person who needs to hear exactly how this department operates." Dana hesitated, her mind visibly racing to process the shift in my tone. She clearly thought I was offering a high-stakes negotiation tactic. She assumed I simply wanted to dramatically demand my promotion and my raise in front of a mid-level manager to leverage my power, before ultimately saving the day like I always did. She nodded sharply, hastily smoothing down the front of her expensive blazer, desperately trying to reconstruct her shattered armor. "Fine," Dana agreed, her breathing still ragged and uneven. "Let us go to the integration room." We walked side by side down the long, heavily carpeted corridor toward the executive suites. The cinematic tension in the air was so incredibly thick it felt exactly like moving through deep, freezing water. Every single step we took echoed the impending, unavoidable collision. The open-plan office around us was completely silent, as dozens of coworkers simply stopped typing and watched us march toward the glass doors at the end of the hall. When Dana pushed open the heavy oak doors of the main integration boardroom, She stepped inside and immediately froze on the threshold. Her foolish assumption of a quick, tactical delay completely evaporated into thin air. The massive, glass-walled room was not empty, nor was it filled with the usual junior technical staff she was expecting to easily manipulate and impress. Sitting rigidly around the polished mahogany table were the absolute highest-ranking individuals in the entire corporation. Owen Pike, the chief financial officer, sat at the head of the long table, his face a hard mask of grim, silent anticipation. To his immediate right sat Lila Boone from Human Resources and Maris Vale, the general counsel, both looking intently at the thick stacks of printed emails resting before them. Next to them sat Nora Kincaid, the uncompromising head of internal audit, her hands folded neatly over a very familiar, incredibly thick black binder containing every single piece of evidence I had forwarded her. Finally, sitting on the far side of the room, was the lead operations representative from Stonevale Capital, looking thoroughly confused and deeply alert to the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Dana stumbled backward half a step, the last remaining drops of blood rushing entirely out of her face. She desperately tried to maintain a normal expression, forcing the corners of her mouth upward into a grotesque, frozen, completely artificial smile. She looked wildly from Owen to Nora, silently begging for an explanation she already knew deep in her bones. I walked smoothly past her frozen body and moved directly into the center of the massive room. I did not slam my manila folder onto the table. I did not yell, scream, or point my fingers in dramatic accusation. I placed the thin folder down onto the polished wood with a touch so incredibly light it made almost no sound at all. It was the physical, undeniable manifestation of my entire strategy, the heaviest. Most destructive truths do not ever require any forceful, theatrical gestures to completely shatter the ground beneath your feet. I stood tall at the end of the long table, looking back at the woman who had stolen a year of my life. The room was deathly silent, charged with the electric, terrifying anticipation of a falling blade. This was the exact, undeniable culmination of the 5 minutes Dana had frantically begged for in the hallway. It was not a window of time for me to reconsider my resignation, nor was it an opportunity for her to negotiate a fraudulent compromise. It was the final, agonizing 5 minutes that Dana Mercer would ever spend standing in this building with the illusion of executive power. The lead operations representative from Stonevale Capital, a sharp-eyed man who had flown in specifically for this final audit, opened his silver laptop. He did not waste time with corporate pleasantries. He looked directly at Dana and asked the single, fatal question that initiated the collapse. Before we finalize this capital transfer, we need absolute clarity on the system architecture. Who precisely built the rollback contingency plan for the regional transit nodes, and who officially verified the readiness metrics for the third quarter deployment? Dana immediately adopted her signature posture of serene, unshakable authority. She folded her manicured hands over the polished mahogany table, inhaled deeply, and opened her mouth to deliver her carefully rehearsed fiction, fully expecting me to nod silently in the background just as I had done for an entire year. I did not let her speak a single word. "I can answer that," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy silence of the boardroom. It was not a shout. It was not laced with bitterness or emotional distress. It was a calm, steady, and incredibly clear statement of objective fact. Dana snapped her head toward me, her eyes widening in sheer panic, but I did not look at her. I kept my gaze locked firmly on the Stonevale representative. "I am the sole author of the rollback contingency plans, the operational playbooks, and the entire technical framework you are currently reviewing," I stated smoothly. "However, I cannot confirm the integrity of the readiness metrics. The final compliance certificates were formally submitted and signed under the name of Dana Mercer. Those documents were escalated to the executive board without any actual managerial review, technical audit, or risk assessment of the underlying code I provided. I built the architecture, but the legal certification of its safety is a complete fabrication." The temperature in the massive glass room seemed to plummet instantly. The Stonevale representative stopped typing. Owen Pike, the chief financial officer, leaned forward, the muscles in his jaw clenching tight. Dana desperately tried to salvage the illusion. "Chloe is simply confused about the administrative flow," she interjected, her voice pitching up an octave into a frantic, breathless register. "This is just a minor operational misunderstanding. We review all metrics collaboratively." "There is no misunderstanding," Nora Kincaid interrupted, her voice slicing through Dana's panicked defense like a steel blade. The uncompromising head of internal audit slid a thick, perfectly bound physical document to the exact center of the table. She opened it and began laying out the paper trail with the ruthless efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor. "Yesterday morning, my department received a comprehensive forensic dossier," Nora explained, looking directly at the chief financial officer. "We spent the entire night verifying the metadata. What we found goes far beyond a lack of managerial oversight. We have identified massive, highly irregular financial disbursements regarding a vendor known as Norval Advisory." Nora distributed copies of the cross-reference spreadsheet I had painstakingly built. The invoices submitted by Norval Advisory for premium consulting services contain job descriptions that are completely identical to the internal project folders created by Chloe Thomas during her unpaid overtime hours. The timestamps perfectly align. Furthermore, our preliminary background check confirms that the primary billing director for Norval Advisory is legally married to Dana Mercer's biological sister. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It was the sound of a lucrative, multi-million-dollar career instantly vaporizing into thin air. Dana opened her mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked wildly around the table, desperately searching for a single friendly face, an ally, or a shred of the corporate protection she had enjoyed for years, but there was nothing left. The invisible shield I had carried for her was gone, and she was standing completely exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light. Maris Vale, the general counsel, slowly removed her reading glasses and fixed Dana with a look of pure, unadulterated legal fury. "Dana," Maris said softly, her tone carrying the dangerous weight of an impending federal lawsuit, "I need you to explain to this room, right now, why our corporate risk certifications rely entirely on documents drafted by an employee who holds absolutely no management title, while company funds were simultaneously funneled to an external consultant run by your brother-in-law for that exact same work." Dana could not answer. She simply stared at the printed invoices, her perfectly curated professional mask shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She was no longer a rising executive star. She was a liability caught red-handed. The Stonevale Capital representative immediately closed his silver laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. He stood up from his leather chair and looked at the chief financial officer. "Stonevale is officially suspending the due diligence process effective immediately. We will freeze all investment negotiations until your internal fraud investigation is completely resolved and the legal fallout is fully contained." He picked up his briefcase and walked out of the room without another word, taking the massive financial future of Orline Transit Systems with him. The CEO of Orline, Richard Sterling, had been quietly monitoring the meeting through a secure video link. He had spent the last year looking right past me, only seeing the beautiful, flawless results Dana presented. Now, staring at the smoking crater of his impending merger, he finally saw the massive, invisible infrastructure I had been carrying on my back. His voice crackled over the boardroom speaker, laced with a sudden, desperate urgency. "Chloe, please wait," the CEO pleaded. "This is a catastrophic failure of our management oversight, and I personally apologize. We cannot afford to lose the only person who actually understands this system architecture. If you retract your resignation right now, I will officially name you the Director of Operations by the end of the day. You will have the salary you deserve, complete autonomy, and the absolute authority to restructure this entire department however you see fit." It was the exact golden ticket I had spent 12 agonizing months bleeding for. It was the title, the money, and the power handed to me on a silver platter by the highest authority in the company. I looked at the speakerphone, then glanced down at my completely empty hands. I did not feel a rush of victory. I just felt a profound, peaceful clarity. "I decline the offer," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and resolute. "It is not a matter of financial compensation or titles anymore. I refuse to invest my future in an organization that only discovers the basic concept of fairness when it is terrified of losing something valuable." I turned away from the table and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I did not look back at Dana. I did not need to see her face to know she was completely destroyed. The human resources director and the corporate security personnel were already moving to flank her chair. She would be escorted out of the building before the lunch hour. Her badge deactivated. Her career permanently marked by the brutal reality of her own actions. I returned to the open plan office and quietly packed my few personal belongings into my leather tote bag. The room was buzzing with frantic, whispered rumors, but I did not stop to correct the narrative or bask in the dramatic aftermath. I simply walked out the sliding glass doors, stepped into the crisp morning air, and drove away, leaving the burning wreckage entirely behind me. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I was sitting in my spacious, sunlit office at Crestfall Root Labs, successfully leading my own dedicated team as the Director of Operational Resilience. I had secured the hiring budget I was promised, and my very first act was to recruit Tessa Wynn and 2 other brilliant, overworked analysts who had been suffocating under the toxic culture at Oraline. At Crestfall, we did not operate on panic or stolen credit. We worked hard, but we went home at 6 o'clock. We documented everything, we shared the victories openly, and I made absolutely certain that no one in my department ever had to burn their own life to the ground just to prove their worth to a manager. Looking back, I realized the ultimate strike of my retaliation was not the dramatic moment I handed over the forensic evidence. It was not the profound satisfaction of watching Dana Mercer's fraudulent empire violently collapse in front of the executive board. The greatest, most lethal form of revenge was simply stepping out of the darkness, keeping my own name completely clean, pulling the absolute truth out into the light, and then taking all of my brilliance to build a fundamentally better place, a place that Dana Mercer would never, ever be qualified to lead. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment below and tell me where in the world you are tuning in from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Do not forget to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can reach even more people.